Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Brooke Alford. I am with the INPS Central Chapter team, as well as the Urban Ag and Natural Resource Educator at Purdue Extension, Marion County, who hosts these Zoom presentations. I would like to start with a brief bio of Justin, if I may, Justin, because he has had a interesting path getting here. So Justin is a graduate of Penn State and Indiana State University. He spent a decade as a golf course superintendent in central Pennsylvania before finding his true calling with Purdue Extension. He's now the regional extension turf expert with Purdue Extension and conducts lawn and turf programming throughout the region. His current passion project is teaching people that it is possible to have a quality lawn without using pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, something we all know is so important for our environment, for our habitat. So Justin, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you. I invite people to enter questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. We can do Q&A at the end. However, if there's something that needs like immediate clarification, Justin, I might just gently interrupt you for a moment to clarify a comment that somebody might need clarification on, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Justin, with that, do you want to take it over and start your presentation?
I would love to. Okay, so I'll spare you the introduction because Brooke did a better one than I could have done myself. So I appreciate that. Um, I do welcome your questions, and if it is something that's pertinent to the immediate conversation, feel free to interrupt. And if you want to unmute and interrupt, I'm even okay with that. If we were doing this in person, my favorite kind of presentation is an interactive one. I'm partial to face-to-face programming, but sometimes it's nice to be able to do something like this where you can be talking to people in Austin, Texas. So, like Brooke said, I spent a long time as a golf course superintendent, and I spent a long time in pursuit of a perfect lawn. I'm trying to get my. There we go. Now we're going. So I spent a long time striving for perfection, and perfection in my eyes was dark green, weed free, uniform, looks like carpet, looks like the pictures that you're looking at here. And that was my job. That was my job for 10 years. It was my responsibility to make a golf course look like that. And at the time, I didn't really see a problem with it. I did what I'd gone to school to learn to do, and I enjoyed it. I enjoy working outside. I enjoy working in the industry. But I kind of got to a little bit of a crossroads where, like probably a lot of people in the room, I started to read between the lines and kind of inform myself on a lot of things that maybe you didn't see the whole picture on. And that's what's kind of led me to the programming I'm doing now. So the theory was greener is better, right? Weeds are ugly and things need to look perfect. And that's what I went to school to learn to do. And I did a pretty good job of it for a long time. As we get started, this program is going to be sort of split into two separate portions. The first part, the longer part, and that's going to be how to optimize turf health utilizing no chemicals or synthetic fertilizers. And the second part is going to be, I call it reimagining the home lawn. So as we get started here with the first one, I ask myself, how did we get here? How did we get to that point where we've been convinced that anything short of a weed-free, beautiful green lawn is some sort of failure, right? I know a lot of people I meet with when I do these presentations, whether it's in Indianapolis or someplace like that where it's more urban, there's a lot of pressure on people to have a nice lawn, to make sure that they're keeping up with the neighbors. Lord knows you don't want to be the reason that your neighbor's perfect lawn gets dandelions, right? And it made me really wonder, when did we get to the point where this was what we accepted as the norm, right? We know, when my grandparents took care of their lawn, that wasn't the way it was. Nobody sprayed the weeds in their lawn. They were way too concerned about things that actually mattered, right? Not just the aesthetics of a lawn. And you can decide for yourself what you think the motives are, how we got here. Was it industry? Was it money? Was it, you know, like a lot of things, we're all conditioned to buy and to seek out the answer, right? And the answer is usually something we purchase, right? Whether it's the fashionable coat or jeans, or it's what do we got to do to have the perfect lawn? Everything is about appearances, and we've been conditioned that this is what we must do. And I'm going to kind of challenge that theory tonight. So when we talk about the actual agronomy of it, when we get started on what it takes to have a nice lawn without using all of those inputs, my mantra is the best defense is a good offense. And what I mean by that is that you need to take a proactive stance on your lawn. So if you have a really shady lawn, okay, you live in town, you've got lots of mature oak trees on your property, and your property doesn't see a great deal of sunlight, there are specific types of grass that are going to do well there, and there are specific types of grass that aren't going to do well there. So we want to start with knowing that we have the right grass species. A healthy soil. So anytime that you're looking at an approach like this, a more natural approach, a more organic approach, we'll say, soil health is huge. Okay. And, I'm talking about getting off the drug of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. I think a lot of us have come to realize that those things do not lend themselves to a healthy soil, right? Those products have the tendency to break down a lot of what will make a soil a healthy soil, a living soil. So that's going to be part of the project too, as you move forward and try to have a good lawn without using these products. Cultural practices. What I mean by that is mowing and aerification and procedures like that, where you're going to interface with your lawn. Those are also a great opportunity to make your lawn stronger without using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. So I use the slide in every single turf presentation I use. I made it 7 years ago, and I still throw it in every presentation because it's important. It's very basic agronomy, but if you don't slow down and think about each one of these things, you might find out that you are treating the symptom and not the problem, right? When you're dealing with a problem with your lawn. So the basic needs of a turf grass or a plant: water, soil, sunlight, air, and nutrients, right? And if you're on this Zoom meeting, you're probably a gardener or passionate about the outdoors. You probably know all that. That being said, when you're in your lawn and you're looking at your lawn and you see the thin spot over here and you kind of get in problem solving mode, why is this way? What do I need to do? Is it this? Is it that? Don't forget to look at the big things, the really, really obvious things. Do you not get enough sunlight? Is your property a small backyard, all boxed in with privacy fence or screened with arborvitae? Maybe you don't get very good air movement. Is your soil poor? Is your soil compacted? There's a lot of different soil issues. Do you have drainage issues? All of those can affect your soil. Maybe you are nutrient depleted. Maybe you have a ton of competition with trees for both water and nutrients and sunlight, right? So don't overlook these very, very basic principles of what it takes to make a plant happy, because turf grass is pretty finicky. And if it doesn't have these things, it's going to struggle in a lot of instances. These are your primary cool season turf grasses. I'm not going to talk about warm season turf grasses, so I hope I'm not slighting our friend in Austin, Texas. I didn't anticipate that, but the principles are the same. It's just different species. Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass make up the vast majority of home lawns in the Midwest. in the Northeast. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and those are the predominant lawn grasses there. They're typically seeded into a lawn as a blend of the two species, and it's because they complement each other well. Their colors match up nicely. You know, when one's thriving, another one might be struggling a little bit, but when they switch places, they seem to do okay, right? They have a nice relationship together. Fine fescues. Fine fescues are going to be the primary grass that you would seed in a shaded situation. So if you have that shaded lawn that I talked about a couple slides ago, fine fescues are what you're going to want to try to establish when you're seeding. If you've got a really shady backyard, you'd be wasting time, energy, money, and seed if you were to seed it to primarily Kentucky bluegrass, because that seed's going to struggle. It's probably never going to get a good start or ever really get strong. So you want to make sure that you're suiting your seed to your location. Creeping bank grass, common cool season turf grass, but not a lawn grass for the most part. It's something you're going to see in more high maintenance scenarios, such as sports fields or golf courses primarily. It's primarily, in my opinion, a golf course grass. Turf type tall fescue. So when I was at Penn State learning about turf grass a really long time ago, tall fescue was kind of an also. You know, we talked about all the long grasses, and then we're like, also there's tall fescue. And we would talk about how it was kind of coarse texture, didn't really look nice, wasn't as desirable in traits, and most people didn't use it. That was 20 years ago. And the genetics on tall fescue have gotten a lot better. They've done a lot of work, and it's a much better long grass than it was when I was at Penn State. And it's taking over in market share in a lot of places. If you go to the box stores to get seed, right? If you go into Menards or Rural King, Home Depot, Lowe's, what have you, Ace Hardware, and you go to get grass seed, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to find bags of turf type tall fescue. And the reason that turf type tall fescue is increasing in popularity is not just that the characteristics have gotten better. It's a softer texture. It just makes a nicer grass under a bare foot in your yard. But it's pretty low input, which lends itself really well to the conversation we're having here. It doesn't need near as much fertilizer. It is drought tolerant. It's a good low maintenance turf grass. And for that reason, we're seeing a lot of people starting to use it. So these are your primary cool season turf grasses. Here's another slide I recycle in every presentation I do. And what I'm saying here is know your soil. Actually understand your soil. When we talk about grass, we tend to pay a lot of attention to what we see, right? The visual aspect of it, the grass plant growing up in your yard. But what you're not seeing is just as important, more important. And that's your soil, because the health of the plant is how it's doing underground. The root strength, the root size, the root health has everything to do with how strong your grass is going to be in your yard. And the best way to put yourself into a situation where you can do that is to inform yourself on your soil. So I'm a huge proponent of soil testing. For a very small investment, you get a ton of information, right? You simply getting your hands on the soil and getting into the ground, you're going to learn something from it, right? If your soil looks like that and it's dark and it's rich and it's crumbly, you're probably on the right track. If when you go to take a soil sample, it's like really light brown bordering on gray and it's hard, and then when you kind of grind it up, it's just dust, right? You've probably got what I would call a dead soil, right? Doesn't have much organic matter, doesn't have much of a living component to it. So just seeing it, getting your hands on it, you're going to learn something. But getting a soil test, you can learn about soil structure. When I say soil structure, that means the particle size breakdown of your soil. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on our presentation, but that has a ton of impact on the soil's ability to retain moisture and retain nutrients, not only to retain moisture, but allow moisture to percolate. So you want a blend of those things. You want to shoot for a loamy type soil. You don't want it to be too heavy clay. You don't want it to be too heavy sand. But that's what I mean by soil structure. Your pH is super important. And if you are in an instance where maybe you have used a lot of products on your yard in the recent past, a lot of synthetic fertilizer, if you do that, there's a pretty good chance you've pushed your pH down if you haven't applied lime. I often see that with people who've been on the 4 fertilizer applications a year from the local lawn care company. And they'll say it's just not working the way it used to. It used to just look so green. And then you get their pH tested and find out that it's 4.5 or something like that, and it's pretty sour. So a lime application to bring that back in line. Lime is pretty cheap, right? So getting your pH down is going to really unlock a lot of things, because you can do a lot of things right with your lawn, but if your pH is way out of whack, it's not going to work as well as it would if your pH was more neutral where it needed to be. And soil fertility, right? Soil fertility is important. And just because we're talking about not using synthetic fertilizers doesn't mean that we're not going to address soil fertility. There's other ways of doing that. Not used to just talking and talking and talking. Usually I'm doing these presentations and I'm getting interaction stuff. So bear with me. I hope I'm not going too fast. Soil. What do I mean by soil?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, super. So when I say soil, I didn't say dirt, I said soil, right? So what is soil? There's a lot of components that make up what I would call a healthy soil. What you'll hear people say, living soil. So in your soil, you're going to have all your particles that we just discussed, right? You're going to have your coarser particles being sand, your kind of more moderate particles, which would be your silt particles, and then your fines, your clays. You should also have organic matter, a pretty healthy organic matter content. And there should be some living component to your soil. There should be bacteria, there should be insects, there should be fungi, worms. Worms are a really good indicator of the fact that your soil's still alive, right? I'll be honest, I didn't see a lot of worms in the fairways at my golf course when we aerified. Saw a few, but not many. And I just did a workshop at a soybean field this past fall with somebody who's been using conservation programs for about the last 6 years. And his soil was rich, and there were a lot of worms, and there was a lot of insects. There was a lot of life in that soil, and that goes a long way towards helping your organic matter content and your nutrient availability and retention in the soil. Slide here to talk about the particle size, because I think that's really important when it comes to turfgrass rooting and health. As you look at this triangle, I told you want to kind of land in the loamier soil, which would make sense. It's kind of in the center of the triangle. If your soil is too heavy in clay, you're going to have very, very poor moisture penetration, we'll say, into the root zone, right? If you have one of those clay lawns, you know what I'm talking about, right? That you can put water in a central point, and it just kind of spreads over the top of the soil, and it never really makes its way down, more than an inch or so. And then you take a situation where maybe you have a sandier soil. I spent some time living in the South in Georgia along the coast in Savannah, a lot of sandy soil there. And moisture works through a sandy soil fast. You can get adequate rain on a golf course, today on a sandy soil, and you could need to water in 3 days because it's gone, because you've got so many macro pores and that water just makes its way through. So you need to strike a balance in the root zone of turfgrass, because you need those smaller pores to help to retain moisture, but you also need those larger pores for air, because if the roots can't breathe, if they can't get air, then they're really going to struggle. And those larger pore spaces that can't hold water are the ones that are kind of reserved for getting air to the roots of the plant. So that's kind of my speech on why you want to strive to have a good balance in your soil particle size. And I'm not sure this is probably the best place to talk about it. And if I come up on a slide where I address it and I have to skip over it or get redundant, I apologize. But were you to get a soil test done and you were to look at the particle size breakdown of your soil and you say like, wow, I'm really heavy in clay or I'm really heavy in sand. Unless you were going to strip everything off at the top of your lawn and incorporate the components that you are lacking and then till it really thoroughly and incorporate it, you're not going to change it by top dressing a sandy soil or a clay soil with sand. A lot of people think, oh, I need more sandy particles or silty particles, so I'm just going to kind of spread them on a clay lawn. That won't work. You're going to get layering. They're never really going to mix in. So if you want to amend a soil that's lacking, I would advise you to add organic matter, peat, compost. Okay. That's going to be how you're going to change the porosity of your root zone, how you're going to improve both drainage and moisture retention. It's really the only way, short of a complete lawn renovation or the replacement of your topsoil. That's really the only way to amend it. But if you do that right, you're going to see a lot of other benefits. If you were to incorporate a really quality compost, you're not only going to improve the physical structure of your root zone, you're also going to improve the living component, and you're going to see an increase in nutrient availability to the plant. Talk a little bit about turf fertilization and the different grass species. So as you can see, if you look at the grass species in your left column, and then what we mean here by low maintenance and high maintenance is what kind of grass are we talking about here? If we're talking about, your backyard that you mow once every week or once every 2 weeks, and you're not really too worked up about it, we're gonna go ahead and file that under low maintenance. If we're talking about that little 1/8 of an acre in front of your house that you're really trying to keep green and beautiful because all the neighbors walk by walking their dogs every day, then maybe that's your high maintenance. Or maybe we're talking about turf with a different purpose, maybe sports turf or golf course turf, or maybe it's a public facility, a park, something like that, where you're trying to, appearances matter, right? It might be a higher maintenance turf. So you see there's a difference there, how much nitrogen they might require, right? And there's also a difference in how much nitrogen they might require per species. Now, if you look at the bottom here, perennial ryegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, 2 to 3 pounds of N on an annual basis. For a low maintenance turf, 3.5 to 5 for higher maintenance turf. I would say, my personal opinion, no home lawn falls under high maintenance to me as far as nutrient requirements. I don't see it. I don't think that there's return on investment for the homeowner to put that kind of nutrition out on their turf. They're just not going to see the return on it. So I would say all home lawns should be falling under the low maintenance category. But as you see, perennial ryegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, they're going to chew up 2 to 3 pounds of nitrogen a year. Turf type tall fescue and fine fescue, you can see 1 to 2 pounds. So as I was speaking about earlier, turf type tall fescue has some appeal because it requires less for it to be healthy and robust. That's just nitrogen we're talking about, but a lot of other important nutrients to the turf grass plant. Phosphorus. If you're a gardener, you know about these things. When you look at a fertilizer bag and you have NPK, right? 16, 4, 16, whatever, right? Whatever the analysis is. When I think about grass, nitrogen makes the plant grow up. Okay, that gives you the lateral shoot growth, the cell elongation, the physical growth of a grass plant that you're seeing, nitrogen handles most of that. Phosphorus is your root growth. That's why if you were to look at a starter fertilizer, you're starting your vegetable seeds or you're starting lawn seed, your starter fertilizer is going to be 12, 24, 12 or 8, 20, 10, whatever. And that is because phosphorus gives you your root growth. And that's super important with a healthy turf plant.
Hey, Justin, quick question from
Mhm.
Amy. When you refer to pounds, that's pounds per what?
Thousand. That great clarification. Pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So yeah, you talk to somebody who's done it a lot and they think that everybody talks the same language, and I apologize. But yeah, when I say 1 to 2 pounds, that means how much nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, right? And that could be a lesson in itself, calibrating a spreader and all of that. But yeah, that's what I mean when I say that. 1 to 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet or 2 to 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So we're going to go through these kind of quick, but I just want to show you that there are some natural options for fertilizer for home lawns. First thing you need to know right up front about all things truly green lawn, all things organic. None of them are going to work as good as the synthetics and the stuff from the store, especially if you have what I would call a dead soil that's lacking in organic matter and lacking in that living component. When you go to start feeding your lawn with, blood meal as opposed to urea, don't expect to see the same kind of impact that you were seeing. You're not going to see it. You're playing the long game. Um, if you're going to adopt these strategies, understand that on behalf of your little slice of the earth, you're going to play the long game, and you're going to know that it's going to take a little time to get to that point where you've turned the tide and changed things, right? These products are going to have way less of a nitrogen content than your synthetics will. And because they have way less of a nitrogen content, that means you're going to put out way more product, right? So it's not as efficient going out. You might have to put out, hundreds of pounds of some of these types of products, whereas you might have only had to have gone out with a 40-pound bag of a synthetic. But as you see here, you can look through the list. I don't need to read it to you, but all naturally occurring things. You see the NPK breakdown of, and that's basically percent of that weight that is the content of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So kelp meal, corn gluten, soybean meal. There's a lot of these things that are out there. They're becoming a little bit more readily available. But just to understand, you're probably going to have to look a little harder to find it. You're probably going to have to put a little bit more out. You probably have to be a little bit more patient. You have to measure your expectations a little bit. Fertilization timing. This, I think, is super duper important. Okay. I beat this drum hard. For homeowners, the best time for anyone fertilizing grass, but homeowners especially, because you're probably only going to do it once or twice. The best time to fertilize your lawn is in the fall. Okay. The second best time is also in the fall. I'm a huge advocate for September and November as my fertilization timing. You don't want to fertilize in the summer because it's hot. You could stress out the plant. You're not really going to get the bang for your buck. You're probably going to see some of it leached away. You don't want to fertilize in the spring because you have excessive growth, right? You have the spring flush. You don't need to add to that. We all know what it's like in the spring. It feels like you need to mow your lawn 3 times a week to keep it from looking messy, and none of us have the time to do that. So don't make it any harder than you have to. So I really like September. You've got cool temperatures, and it will get the plant recovered from a hard fought summer where it probably dealt with some heat stress, probably dealt with some drought stress. It's a really good time to get the plant strong going into the winter. And then November is awesome. It's a great time to do it because what's happening is that plant is taking all of its energy, all of its carbohydrates, and it's storing them in its root system to get ready to overwinter. So if you give it fertility, then it's going to store it all in its roots, and it's going to make it a much stronger plant going into the winter to help overwinter. Situations like this, right, where you've got a nasty cold winter, stronger your plant is going in, the more resilient it's going to be in the face of the elements. And then all that stuff is stored in the root system, and you're going to come out real strong in the spring. So if you were to fertilize one time a year, do it in the fall. If you were to fertilize twice, do it in the fall. If you were really excited, you want to do it 3 times, I would go late spring, May, somewhere in there. May, June is good, but fall's really, I think, sufficient. I should say fall's the best time for everything. It's the best time to seed grass. It's the best time to fertilize. If I was talking to a conventional turf management group, I'll tell them it's the best time to kill weeds for the same reason that it's good for fertilizing, because a plant would absorb the product just the same as it would the fertilizer into its root system. But we're going to talk about that today because it's not so bad. Mowing is going to be your single most frequent interaction with your lawn, right? You're going to mow your lawn probably once a week for, months on end. And that's the one interaction you have constantly, and you can make a big difference in how strong your turf plant is. Every time you cut your grass, you're injuring that plant. So you want to minimize that injury, right? So let's talk about height of cut. Most lawn grasses prefer a height of cut of at least 3 inches. I know a lot of the world likes to cut their lawn shorter than that. And it's your lawn. Cut it how you like. But if you want the grass to be healthy, you should cut it at least 3 inches. What that does is it leaves plenty of plant tissue to complete photosynthesis. If you reduce that tissue too much, it can't photosynthesize the way that it needs to, and it'll be weaker on account of it. Also, let's talk about how much tissue to remove. The rule of thumb is you typically want to try to never remove more than 1/3 of the leaf tissue. So if your grass plant was 6 inches tall, the rule of thumb would say you should only remove 2 inches of it, because you don't want to remove more than 1/3. And that helps to reduce the stress on the plant by not, taking half of its tissue away in one shot. That being said, if we're being realistic, that's not practical. If you had 2 rainy weeks in April and you went to mow your lawn, I'll bet you couldn't raise the deck high enough on your mower to follow the 1/3 rule. So don't let it melt your brain if you can't do it. But if you can, try to strive to maintain that, because it will help. Also, as we leave that slide on mowing, keeping your blades sharp. Super duper important. It's not hard to sharpen your own lawnmower blades if you're handy. If you're not handy, it's not hard to have a second set and then switch them out, and then have, the local lawnmower shop sharpen them for you. You don't have to do it every week. You don't have to do it every month, but I would say that at the very least, you should do it every off season. And we've all had that moment when you're mowing and you hear the thunk of a rock or, a baseball or toy your kid left in the yard, whatever. And there's a pretty good chance that you've damaged your blades. And that means that you're going to be injuring your plant every time you mow with that really dull, banged up lawnmower blade. So keep an eye on those. Try to keep them sharp. If you mow your lawn and it looks really nice, it looks really green, and it looks really uniform, and then the next day you go out and there's a brown haze to it, I would challenge you to get down on the ground or pick some grass and pick it up and look at it. And you're probably going to find, when you look at those leaf tips, that they're torn up. They're not cut sharp like you would with scissors. They're cut like you did it with, you ripped it. And if that's the case, you're doing your grass plant a disservice. It's going to be more susceptible to disease. It's going to be more susceptible to drought stress, more susceptible to insects. So sharp mower blades, cut at the right height of cut, try to get the frequency right, and you'll be doing yourself a big favor. Controlling weeds without pesticides. Disclaimer, you're not going to have 100% weed control. You're not even going to have probably 90% weed control, okay? There's a lot of things you can do to make your grass plant really, really strong so that it will outcompete weeds. But if you don't want to use pesticides, you're going to need to understand that there is going to have to get to a manageable threshold of some weeds in your lawn. And that's fine. It's fine. Really, like, who cares, right? Like some weeds, it's not the end of the world. But you can have mostly really good, strong grass and have a nice lawn just by giving your grass plant as much of the things it needs as it can get. Work to address cultural issues. So the things we talked about earlier, shade, drainage, fertility, address those things, your soil, make your soil strong, make sure the plant's getting all of those things it needs, air, nutrients, sunlight, water. Identify your problem weeds. Weeds are interesting in that they move in, certain weeds will move in for certain reasons, right? Certain weeds will like a low pH, right? And they won't like a good neutral pH. So if you correct your pH, your grass is happier, that weed is less happy. Certain weeds do really well in perpetually wet soil. So if you have those weeds and you have perpetually wet soil, then you start thinking about soil drainage, whether it's surface drainage or subsurface drainage. You want to be addressing the disease, not the symptom, right? To go out and spray 2,4-D on the weed would be addressing the symptom. And what we're trying to do is address the disease so that the weeds don't want to be there. So if you have, some weeds love highly compacted areas. If you have that path that the dogs tear out the back door of your house and run every time they run out into your lawn, or maybe right along the edge of your driveway, or right along the edge of your sidewalk, I'll bet you'll look and you'll see certain weeds, maybe like knotweed, that grows there because they love a highly compacted soil. Relieve that compaction, make your grass plant happier. Knotweed won't want to be there as bad, right? So you see what I'm getting at is that you need to identify your weeds, find out what it is that makes those weeds happy. And then odds are, in a lot of instances, the things that make those weeds happy are things that make grass unhappy. So you want to strive to make your grass as strong as you can and create an environment where the grass is thriving and the weeds are struggling. That being said, there's certain weeds that like a lot of the same things grass likes, right? So you're not going to get them all that way, but you can get a lot of them by simply making your grass plant as strong as possible. Like I said earlier, best defense is a good offense. Pre-emergent control is easier. Address these things, stay out in front of it. Don't let it get out of hand, because if you're not going to use products, chemicals to kill weeds, if your lawn is almost entirely weeds now, it's going to be a lot of work to turn it into almost entirely grass. So stay ahead of it. Okay, this kind of speaks to what I just talked about. Why do I have weeds in my turf? Is it my pH? Do I have a lot of shade? Am I heavily compacted? Am I excessively wet? Do I have poor fertility? What are my cultural practices like? You can shade out a lot of weeds from thriving and or that seed even ever germinating just by maintaining a good mowing height. Okay, if you keep your grass cut at 3.5 inches, that's going to shade the bottom of the crown area of the grass plant enough that there's a lot of weed seeds that won't get the adequate sunlight they need to even germinate. So mowing height can even affect your weeds. So address the disease, not the symptom. Annual weeds. I feel like this is important. I feel like I probably need to pick up my pace a little bit, so I'm gonna. We'll catch questions at the end if I go fast or you have a question, but it's important to understand the life cycle of the weed, right? Annual weeds. An annual weed is a weed that's going to germinate from seed, mature, and die in under 12 months. Crabgrass, is probably the most famous one. A winter annual is going to do that over the winter. Annual bluegrass is a great example of a winter annual that will start getting established in the fall and overwinter, and then it tends to die out in the summer, although annual bluegrass can persist. But most winter annuals are gonna kick it at the beginning of the year. Summer annuals are going to germinate in the spring, grow through the summer, and then set seed, die at the end of the summer. First frost, crabgrass, goosegrass. Understanding the life cycle of the plant helps you to combat those weeds. So if you're talking about annual weeds, corn gluten is out there as an option as a pre-emergent herbicide. They're doing trials on campus. I was actually talking to one of the fellows on campus about this, and his results have not been great. So he's not sold yet, but it's an option as a pre-emergent. It most likely works better than nothing. So worth a try if you want to go out with a pre-emergent. You'll have anecdotal conversations with lots of people that they'll say, they feel like it worked really good. There's not a lot of other more natural options out there. Herbicidal soaps, salt, Epsom salt, vinegar-based herbicides. So there's things that you can use to kill weeds. You're not going to kill a weed with Epsom salt and vinegar and Dawn dish detergent the way that you would kill it with Roundup. And what I mean by that is you're getting a foliar burn on that plant, right? With these more natural approaches. You're getting a foliar burn on the plant. It will look dead. It'll be back in a week or so. Understand that, right? Understand that it's going to be kind of a commitment to do that. It works. There's other things. Heat. You could burn them with a torch. They make weed killer torches if you had weeds in your gravel driveway or something that you just want to go out. That would work. But none of these are going to work as good as the synthetic products. That's why the synthetic products have become so popular, because they're really good at what they do. They're really bad for the environment, but they're really good at what they do. Best practices for controlling weeds organically. Pre-emergent control is best, right? So getting out in front of it with your cultural practices and your super strong turf. You can have some luck with a pre-emergent and corn gluten to try to keep things like crabgrass at bay. But I'll tell you this, as a turf manager, if you have really robust, strong turf grass, you're not going to have that much crabgrass. You're probably going to get some, but I promise you, you'll have less than the person with the bare spots and the compaction and the poor quality lawn. They're going to have a lot of crabgrass because there's a lot of room for the crabgrass to move in. So concentrate on creating an environment where your turf is super happy, and then you'll have less weeds. Mow at least 3 inches. Time your mowing to prevent weeds from going to seed. So dandelions, right? If a well-timed mowing gets all those dandelion seed heads knocked down before they turn into puffballs and spread across your yard, and you get them knocked down, you're containing it simply with your mowing. I raise alfalfa. I have a field. I sell hay. And the perimeter of my field, the stuff that isn't mine, there's weeds along the roadsides on the state roads. I need to go out there and I need to mow that down with my bush hog at a certain time every year to make sure that the thistles don't go to seed and make their way into my field. Mowing for weed control. So it actually will work. Spot spray and overseed to encourage turf density. So if you were to go out with one of those non-selective, more natural homemade weed killers, and then overseed, in those areas and push it in the fall to get grass reestablished, you can start to kind of take over some of those areas again. Maintain your ideal turf fertility. That's going to be something that you're going to need to work at, again, playing the long game, using the natural products. Soil, super important. Soil testing, maintain a healthy soil, increase your organic matter content. If you've got one of those dead soils, you want to aerify that lawn. So what I mean, say by aerify, you're going to pull a core, core aerifier is going to pull a core of soil out, hundreds of them, thousands of them right in your lawn. and then drag it with anything, an old piece of chain link fence, something to break up that dirt, work it back in. You're going to get thatch out of those holes. And then I would encourage you to spread a really good quality compost and work that into those holes. You're going to be improving the soil quality by adding organic matter, by adding a living component, and that's going to increase your nutrient availability long term, and your moisture retention, and improve your soil quality, get it looking like that black, rich soil. Again, we're talking about the long game. Like, this is going to take years, 2, 3, 4 years of aerifying every year and incorporating that compost. And if you have questions, we could talk a little more about that. Address your cultural issues. Plant the correct grass species. Aerify and top dress. And when I say top dress, that's what I'm talking about, incorporating that compost. Overseed is necessary. Don't let bare ground go, because weeds will come in. So if you have bare ground, seed it. Seed it at the right time, which is the best time is fall. The second best time is spring. But if you have bare ground, get seed growing in there, because otherwise you're going to have weeds growing in there. Maintain your fertility and mow correctly.
Quick
Okay.
question from Deb Housen. How often to aerate? Is that annual or biannual?
If you do it annually, you're doing an awesome job by your home lawn. If you have dry, dusty, dead soil and you want to improve that, then I would say treat it like a project, and maybe look at doing it in the spring and then again in the fall. If your goal is to get a good, healthy, living soil, right, you're going to need to incorporate more of that organic matter. If you did it once a year for several years, you're going to make a huge difference. You're going to make a huge difference. So it's all in, I guess, what you've got the patience, the time for, whether you're looking at it as a maintenance thing or whether you're looking at it as an overhaul thing. But the more of that poor quality soil you can get out, relieve that compaction, incorporate a quality compost, you're going to see a stronger, healthier soil.
Makes
But
sense.
annually be awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, just a few slides here. Reimagining the home lawn. And this is really where I'm at. I believe in everything I just talked about. And I think that it's a hard work, a determined approach to having a lawn, but you can do it. But I wonder, like, just sit back and think about it. Now, I hear a lot of people saying that lawns are the biggest waste of green space in the world, and that you're a bad person for having a lawn, and it should be a butterfly garden, or it should be whatever. I'm all for those things, but you're not a bad person for having a lawn. You're just not, right? Like, those things are all good, but I'm really impatient with the people who say that lawns are the worst, because they're not. But what is the purpose or function of your home lawn? I think that's a question that we all need to ask ourselves. And if we were in a room all together, I would ask you, I would just point to something like, what's the purpose of your home lawn? And somebody would say, well, it's mostly aesthetic. I sit on my porch and I look at it, or, this, that, or the other thing. Most of them aren't utilitarian. But for me, it is, right? I got 3 little kids. My lawn is a football field. It is a baseball field. It's where the sledding happens. It's where all of these things happen. And you can't do that in a pollinator patch. So while, planting a butterfly garden might be perfect for somebody who doesn't need their lawn for the things I need it for, it doesn't work for me. Like, I need a lawn, right? So everybody needs to figure that out for themselves, and then they can address it from there. Maybe you have 3 acres of lawn. Do you need 3 acres of lawn, or do you need a half an acre of lawn? And maybe then you do need to plant some native species and a butterfly garden, or, a pollinator field. Awesome, right? Really give an honest assessment. I have more lawn than I need. I need a lot of lawn for my kids and the things that we enjoy doing, but I probably don't need as much as I do. And we're actually looking at ways that you might have a little less. So really assess it before you invest the time and energy into it, and ask yourself, what is the purpose of my lawn? Like this slide. If we were all in the room together, I would ask a show of hands, who thinks this is hideous? And maybe like none to 1 hands would go up, right? This is just grass and clover. Just grass and clover. And if you would have gone to the hardware store in 1940 to buy a lawn mix, this is what you would have bought. I think that looks nice. Sure, maybe it might bother you when the clover flowers. Um, but in that lawn right there, you have grass that is a taker by nature, right? It needs nutrients to thrive and be healthy. And you have a legume, you have clover, which is a giver by nature, and it's supplying the very nutrients to the soil and to the grass plant. They have a symbiotic relationship, and they're growing happily together, taking care of each other. Um, they're going to grow well together. When one is maybe going through a rough stretch, the other might encroach a little bit and close it up, and then it might swing back the other way, during a different uh, condition. You need less nutrients, less inputs. I don't understand why anybody would think that this is anything but an answer to our problems, right? Um,
May I ask a
so I
question myself? Now it's my question.
absolutely
Thank you.
go for it.
It's I think this is the case, but I'm not sure. I need you to tell me. Will the clover roots go deeper and help aerate the soil a bit in themselves
So they will root stronger and better than grass.
and increase
And
drainage?
yeah, I think that, I mean, anytime you've got roots work, anytime you've got anything working its way through the soil, it's it's opening up seams, cracks, fractures in the soil, and uh, creating more air in the root system, which is good for both of them. So to me, this is, I mean, if you're looking for a low input answer, and they're gonna fill in very nicely. They're not going to leave a lot of bare spots for the random other weeds. You'd be surprised how well that uh, your lawn would stay mostly just clover and grass. At the golf course, I didn't really look at clover as a weed the way I did other things because it looked nice almost all the time. You could hit a golf ball out of it just as easily as you could grass, and it was fine. So I think that you're going to see a movement toward this, and I think it's a really solid, easy answer. But to speak about, this is probably going to be right in the wheelhouse of this group. You don't need all that lawn usually, right? You usually have more than you need. Most people do anyway. What are some other things you could do, right? Um, I'm a huge proponent of the backyard vegetable garden. I do more gardening workshops than anything else. So that's something to consider. Uh, plant a tree or trees, prairie grasses, ground covers, pollinators. All of these things are a great use of a green space if you don't have a real functional purpose for or need for the lawn. And there are very low maintenance turf grasses like fine fescues or buffalo grass. If you seeded a shady lawn to fine fescue and you were okay with it being about that tall, 6 or 8 inches, you would only need to mow it once a year because like fine fescue won't grow to 2 feet tall. It doesn't grow like hay. It gets to about 6 inches and just kind of flops over. It would look natural. It would look kind of like a prairie grass, super low maintenance. You don't even have to mow it, but once or twice a year. Something like buffalo grass would be similar. So all in what you're looking for and all in what you can get away with. I get that, like, if you're living in an HOA and, some nice part of Indianapolis, that probably won't fly. But if you have, your own space and you've got a little elbow room, it would. And there's a throw out to you guys. I encourage people to add value to your community through dedicating a portion of your yard to native plantings, right? We need more of these native plantings, and we need to start, replacing a lot of. I was a landscaper if it wasn't bad enough, I sprayed all the chemicals as a golf course superintendent. I was also a landscaper who planted a lot of things that are now on the invasive species list. I didn't know, guys. I didn't know. But I've learned a lot. So with that, that's all I have. I didn't leave 15 minutes for questions, but I left a few minutes and I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Justin. That was a lot of really great information, and we have some questions to address here. I want to say reimagining the lawn. I do a lot of programming around reducing your lawn to make room for your native plantings. And one thing we talk about is framing your native garden so that it looks very intentional. And having a nice lawn frame around my native garden is how I make my yard acceptable, and also just more kind of legible to people who don't necessarily know native plants that well.
Right.
So lawn is a way to frame your landscaped areas, I guess I would say.
Mhm.
So that's my 2 cents on, because that's what mine is out front. It's a frame. So
Right.
um
Yep.
I would
And
love.
everybody's property is their own, to do with what you see fit.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't have kids playing sports in my yard though, I have to say that, so I can do that.
Right.
So in terms of soil testing, somebody had a question there. I put a link in the chat to our Purdue Extension has a resource online, so you can go find that link. There are a few different labs. There's one close in Indiana, but there are others as well. And in that publication, there's another link to instructions on how to test your soil, how to take a soil test, a sample. Tim asks, how do you deal with snow mold? I'm not sure what that is.
Um, the thing about snow mold is that you don't find out you have it till after it's too late, right? So you get into one of those situations where you have like a lot of moisture in your soil, and then you get that snow cover for a really extended period of time, and then you get snow mold. Um, there's not a lot you can do preventatively at the golf course. We might have gone out with a preventative fungicide application, so probably not interested in that in this conversation. You just recover from it in the spring, right? You overseed, you get it back. By the time that you really see what happened, those pathogens aren't really active anymore. The conditions aren't ripe for it because it's not a situation where you're wet and you're covered with snow anymore because it's springtime. So you just bounce back, right? You overseed and you fertilize and you grow it out. Really, all you can do, unless you were interested in using a fungicide in a preventative application in the fall. But for a homeowner situation, I could never see recommending that.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Triple asked, where could we find the weed specific info? I put a link in the chat to a Penn State publication. Is that indicator weeds provide insight into growing a better lawn? Is that good?
Yep. Um, I'm not off the top of my head familiar with that document, but that sounds right. I am a Penn State graduate, and their turf stuff is really strong. But Purdue's is also awesome too. If you go onto the Purdue turf website, and you could probably just Google Purdue turf. I don't know maybe you can throw the link in the box, but they have a super good section on weeds with great pictures, and they explain to you all of the characteristics and traits of the weeds. And I expect that in there you'll also find information about conditional factors that make them move in. You just got to do a little homework, but the first thing I would do is find out what your weeds are and then do your homework accordingly. And that's easier than ever now with some of these really super good weed ID apps that you can get on your phone, where you could just snap a couple pictures and they're right more than they're wrong now, which is better than we said 5 years ago. They're not always right. Do your homework, double check on them, but there's some really good ones.
Okay. And then Christopher asks, can you compare and contrast liquid aeration versus mechanical aeration?
Okay, so if by liquid aeration you mean the application of a product that says that it will do the same things as aerification, I'm not sold on those products. I've tried them at the golf course, but I've yet to use a product that professed to reduce thatch and increase aeration in a soil profile with a liquid application. For me, physical aeration, there's no substitute for it. And I would advocate for core aerification, where you're physically pulling the soil plugs out that's the best as far as being able to renovate your soil quality as well as increase air movement into the soil profile, increase, moisture movement into the soil profile, and reduce thatch.
Great, thanks. I just shared the Purdue's turf website and then specifically a link to an article about ID and control. It's identification and control of perennial grassy weeds. But I'm sure there's more on there. That was just super fast search. So take a look around. Vicky asked, can you find clover seed in local stores?
Probably not yet. You probably more have to find clover in a farm store as like a forage seed. But I don't know that those would be the variety of clovers that you're looking for. You're probably going to be looking at some online shopping to find a clover that's more of a turf type. I'm convinced this is coming. Just like you had commented in the comments, clover's a fixer, and its relationship with grass just makes sense. And I think as we become more savvy and more intelligent about the way we're treating, the environment and our soil, this is going to become very commonplace again. It might not be next year, it might not be the year after that, but it's coming. So I wished I could tell you where to go for clover seed, but I promise you, if you do some digging online, you'll find it.
What would be you said a turf clover, like what would be a better one if we looked online?
So white clover as opposed to a red clover. Also there's some information out there on more of a micro clovers now. They're a little bit smaller. Clover that probably might be more conducive to the home lawn. For sure, you want to be looking at white clover. And you can get into, if you were to go into a farm store, you could get into some other clovers that are more forage type. So I could say I wished I could give you a good recommendation, although we're not supposed to recommend necessarily from our seat, but do a little research online, and I think you'll find some stuff. If not, you can reach out to me via email, and we can have a conversation about it. I'll do a little bit more homework on it, but doing a 50-50 mix of like rye and blue and clover, I think if you were going to establish a lawn, I think you'd be real happy.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Hey, Vicky, the last link that I just put in the chat is, I think it's Maryland's Extension put out a resource on lawns and micro clover. So that might give you a little further information. Thanks,
Yeah.
Beth. Again, just a super fast Google search.
Yep, they're doing a lot of genetic work on these things already, I think. So you'll see a lot of developments, I think, in the coming years.
Karen asks, what do you think about worm compost tea?
So I'm not super knowledgeable about worm compost tea. I have a coworker here who's in the neighboring county who's very big on worm composting, and she knows all the stuff. My understanding is it's super rich and it's got a lot of good quality to it. But I don't know much about like application rates, things like that. If you had questions about that and you wanted to reach out to Brooke and she can channel it to me. I have a really good resource locally on that, and I could probably get your questions answered, but I'd be speaking out of turn if I said I knew much about it.
And just know, when we're talking about compost tea, really the safest production is an aerated compost tea. There's a certain process to it. What just comes out of your worm bin is called an exudant, and you can definitely use that all. We just we don't recommend using it on edible food. So if you're capturing the exudant that drips out of your worm bin down at the base, that's perfect to use on your lawn. And then teas that you purchase normally go through a process of aeration and such. I hope that helps. So CC down in Texas, I didn't realize it was the odd man out. What do you think about Bermuda in Central Texas?
So I have limited experience with warm season grasses. Like I said, I worked for a golf course in Savannah, Georgia for about a year out of college. Um, Bermuda grass, actually, if I was trying to grow a weed-free lawn and I was going to pick anything, Bermuda grass would be really high on my list because it's a super aggressive grower. It grows super dense, which really helps it to, in my opinion, outcompete weeds better than any of the cool season grasses up here. So if I were you, I would look into all of the things. And like I said, I'm about 20 years removed from working with warm season grasses. So I'm not as up on it as I would have been then. But do your homework on the pH requirements of Bermuda grass, which I think they like it. They like it neutral to just a tick acidic, and get your fertility rates down. And I think if you make Bermuda grass really happy, you're going to outcompete most of the weeds way easier than any of us up here are going to outcompete our weeds trying to make ryegrass and bluegrass happy. It's a very aggressive spreading grass.
Okay, I am just copying a link from Texas A&M. And, also CC, consider reaching out to your local extension office down there. There's a link from Texas A&M Extension.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Justin, thank you. This is so helpful. Most people don't have the capacity to get rid of all their lawn. And like you said, it's all very personal what you need from your lawn. And thinking about that and what you need out of it and understanding how to naturally treat it and make it healthier, and understand that when you go naturally, you're in it for the long game and you're thinking about it each year and seasonally. And I got to go sharpen my blades.
Yep, now's the time. You got all the time in the world now.
Thanks, Justin, so much. Any last questions or comments?
And you can feel free to, shoot me an email, look me up. I'm in Delaware County. You can find my information online easy. So if you had any questions after the fact, feel free to reach out.
Justin, thank you. A wealth of information. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invite, and I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining in.